Spoiler, the world of science cannot exactly agree on how and why we store and recall our memories. We've come a long way in this area, but we're still only chipping away at the edges with psychology, education research, and neuroscience, finding things that do and don't work so we can apply them to the education system. When we're trying to remember something we've learned, there are a number of small systems that interact in order to retrieve the information. So far, we know that to consciously recall a memory, we need to start with a cue. This is our why. For example, who was it that said, "If you do something you love, you'll never work a day in your life"? Well, according to Brainy Quote, it was Jennifer Lopez's ex Mark Anthony. But further research found this saying was anonymous in the earliest located citation back in 1982. The linkage to Confucius seems to be a bit spurious as well. And motivational speaker Harvey Mackay probably helped to popularise the adage, but he was definitely not the originator. So, what happened in your mind while you're trying to think about this quote? Anyone come to mind? If so, leave a comment. But more importantly, the quote itself should have appeared to you as recognisable at least. You'd heard it somewhere before, and at that point, your brain activity would have peaked as you sent thousands of heat-seeking electrical impulses around your long-term memory centres, looking for any hint of a fact that you could recall. The recall cue is the start of the process. As to what happens next, we're a little bit in the dark. And if you think you have control over it, just try not to think about a pink elephant. See, this silly cognitive test exposes that brains constantly are yearning for equilibrium. Its desire to know and put things in its place. While not trying to think of a pink elephant, your brain actively seeks out an image of what it might look like. It's the eternal struggle that people who tend to overthink things fall into. And it's completely normal. Just like searching for the next word in a sentence, you know it's there and you have some idea of what it means, but for the life of you, you just can't recall the right word. But impressively, your brain hands you a number of synonyms or workaround phrases so you can finish your thought. What we do know is how to improve this situation. On average, the better we encode the information, the easier it is to recall. And if we've learned anything from the Penn principles recently, it's that repetition is the golden ticket. This is where a few of the Penn topics actually collide. Retrieval practice, the testing effect, and forced recall are just a few of the topics that meet in the middle when discussing active and passive recall. Passive recall, as we've defined it, requires a shallow use of brain activity. It's a form of pattern recognition, where you see something that looks familiar and you assign it to a meaning that already exists in your memory. In education, one of the arguments against the use of multiple choice in summative assessments is that it doesn't really test the student's understanding and is more likely just to trigger some sort of pattern or word recognition centres in the brain. Yet, students tend to like multi-choice questions. Our brains don't like doing hard work. The harder something is to recall, the greater the chance that the person will disengage and move on. Concentration requires energy, and our bodies are designed to conserve energy, thanks to millennia of evolution. But making it too easy doesn't help with long-term storage. So we find ourselves at a teaching impasse. Too hard and it's ignored. Too easy and the learning misses the mark. So here's my 2 cents for the learning designers and teachers who are out there. Is there a way of practicing new tasks and recalling new knowledge in a way that actually makes the most of both active and passive recall strategies? I haven't explained these terms very well. Active recall is when you're actively trying to test your memory. So active recall are things like doing quizzes, tests, being asked questions, or actively trying to problem solve with the information you've been given. Passive recall is just when you're reviewing the information, like watching a video of what you've already learned, or maybe reading through a textbook or reading through your notes from the day. So now back to the video. As I couldn't find a study that specifically integrated the two for this purpose, I looked at a variety of studies that compared results and looked at the times used in each experiment. What I found was interesting. There are 2 features that kept coming up. 1, what types of learning was actually being recalled, and 2, how long were the studies run for? The latter seemed to be quite short. The studies routinely worked on timescales of days and weeks rather than months or years. And while there are longitudinal studies about memory, they do not compare active and passive strategies over time. The types of learning were mainly concerned with recognition rather than complex recall. For example, things like anatomy, art, faces and photographs. And while there are a number that dealt with complex subjects like mathematics, the recall still relied on learned patterns rather than novel applications. And this is understandable, as the more complex the application, the more difficult it becomes to design a reliable experiment. One study did stand out for its results, that repetition of any form, passive or active, was better than no repetition. And why I say that stood out, considering most studies draw this conclusion, is that it kind of puts its hands in the air by saying something is better than nothing. So if we know active recall trumps passive recall, and that repetition of any kind is better than none, what should we do as teachers to advise our students? Well, I'm glad you asked. I would recommend a schedule that suits the student by providing opportunities for active recall like short answer quizzes, making use of the testing effect, along with some multi-choice quizzes that relieve the pressure but still bring the important topics back to mind, and therefore provide students with the option as to how they practice each activity during their study or post-course schedule. If they're feeling up to it, active strategies will really test them and improve their recall. But if they're tired or overladen with other tasks, then they can squeeze in a multi-choice test and still keep the topic alive in their mind. It's not perfect, but I think keeping track of this type of learner-led practice would provide us with more data to review in coming years by comparing the practical results of students with a schedule of active and passive sessions that they have participated in. If you come across anything like this, or perhaps know of a study that more effectively compares these practices, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Thanks for watching, and please consider subscribing and ringing that little bell so you get notified when the new videos are made available to you. Consider commenting as well. We'd love to start the discussion in the comments. See you soon.